All right, so throughout my coverage of the end of the Afghanistan war so far, we have been talking pretty much mostly about the ways that we have lost the war in Afghanistan, namely, trillions of dollars that we spent on this, the $100 billion that we sank into the Afghan government that collapsed pretty much instantaneously, the human cost, obviously thousands of American troop lives lost as well as countless men, women, and children, innocent civilians that were massacred as a part of this pointless war. And what we haven't been talking about is who actually won this war, not just the Taliban, okay, in a literal sense, but also the defense contractors, the weapons manufacturers who have a profit incentive to keep us going to war, who bribe our politicians to keep us staying in these endless wars, and who have made an absolute killing off of it. So I have a really good article from The Intercept here from John Schwartz, and he basically breaks down the military-industrial complex and how they have profited from the Afghanistan war in a really succinct way. So I wanted to read from this article, and then he gives a good breakdown of exactly how much all of these weapons manufacturers have made. So $10,000 invested in defense stocks when Afghanistan war began, now worth almost 10 times that at 100,000. Was the Afghanistan war a failure? Not for the top 5 defense contractors and their shareholders. So he says, if you purchase $10,000 of stock evenly divided among America's top 5 defense contractors on September 18th, 2001, the day President George W. Bush signed the authorization for use of military force in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and faithfully reinvested all dividends, it would now be worth $97,000, almost $100,000 on the dot. So this is far greater return than was available in the overall stock market over the same period. $10,000 as a point of comparison invested in the S&P 500 index fund over that same period would now be worth $61,000. So almost like a third more in gains in terms of how these defense contractors were outperforming the actual stock market. So that is, defense contractors outperformed the stock market overall by 58% during the Afghanistan war. So obviously a very profitable venture for these companies that are, again, producing weapons that are then sent overseas to be used against Afghan civilians, right? You know, this connection has been transpiring over the entirety of the Afghan war, whether it was George W. Bush, whether it was Obama, whether it was Donald Trump, or whether it was Joe Biden. I give this example all the time, but Joe Biden's head of the Pentagon, his Pentagon chief, is literally a former board member of Raytheon, okay? He was a former board member of one of these weapons manufacturers that has profited over the Afghanistan war in this same way. That's who Joe Biden took and chose to lead the Pentagon. Okay, so this revolving door of military-industrial complex officials continues regardless of who's in office, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. So they continue here. These numbers suggest that it is incorrect to conclude that the Taliban's immediate takeover of Afghanistan upon the U.S.'s departure means that the Afghanistan war was a failure. On the contrary, from the perspective of some of the most powerful people in the U.S., it may have been an extraordinary success. Notably, the boards of directors of all 5 defense contractors included retired top military officers. So here's the revolving door they get into. So the S&P 500, as they just pointed out, $10,000 in 2001 stock purchased today would be $61,000. Then they compare that to the top 5 contractors, as we just said, almost $100,000. And then here they break it down individually. So Boeing, which is the only company out of all of these ones that does not have a majority of their revenue coming from the U.S. government. Every single company on here other than Boeing has an outright majority of the money that they are making in profits coming straight from the U.S. government, okay? Coming from your tax dollars, even though that's not really how we fund these types of things. Generally speaking, your money was being used, our money was being used to funnel into these companies. So Boeing, total return 975%, annualized return of almost 13%, and $10,000 in 2001 stock purchase today would be upwards of $107,000. And their board includes Edmund P. Giambastiani Jr., the former vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a former Inspector General for the Air Force, and a former Navy Chief of Naval Operations. Seems kind of redundant there, but you can see the connections again to the military. So Raytheon, the company I was just talking about that Biden appointed to lead his Pentagon, their board includes retired Air Force General, a retired Navy Admiral, and former Deputy Secretary of Defense. And including, obviously, like I just said, Lloyd Austin, Biden's now head of the Pentagon. And $10,000 in their 2001 stock would be worth $43,000 today, so a little bit lower than Boeing's, but their total return still 331% over the Afghan war. Lockheed Martin, total return 1,200%, annualized return of almost 14%, and $10,000 in stock would equal about $133,000 today, and their board includes a retired Air Force general and a retired Marine Corps general. And General Dynamics, another one, total return of 625% and an annualized return of almost 11%. $10,000 a stock would be worth around $72,000 now, and their board includes former Deputy Secretary of Defense, a retired Navy Admiral, James Mattis, former Secretary of Defense and former Marine Corps General, and Peter Wall, a retired British general, and then finally Northrop Grumman, total return of almost 1,200% and an annualized return of almost 14% as well. $10,000 in 2001 stock would be almost $130,000, and their board includes a retired Navy Admiral and a retired Air Force General. So what you can take from this article that I'm going to link down in the description below if you want to, go and save this for yourself, but the takeaway from this is that we have a revolving door in the same way that in DC politics, they talk about the revolving door of a lot of these politicians that then end up, serving the interests of their donors, who then after the fact, after their political careers, will offer them comfy jobs where they get to sit around and do nothing for these corporations that spent all that time bribing them. They now get to go and retire and sit on some board of directors or something high up in these companies, and they get to retire safely and don't have to worry about that. But this is the revolving door of the military-industrial complex, right? So you have lobbyists, you have all of these different groups, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, that dump millions and millions of dollars into lobbying efforts to go pressure the government to stay in these endless wars, to go pressure the government to launch new wars and new adventures overseas that they can then exploit and profit off. And then you have these contracts that are given from the government to those companies who just bribed them and bribed their campaigns. And they give them these no-bid contracts where they get to dump hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars into these companies directly that just paid off their campaigns, or who have been cozying up with them in these lobbying efforts. And then they turn around, and a lot of these actual admirals and generals, as well as politicians, then end up who are fighting these wars on behalf of Raytheon's profits, then turn around and they go and they join these companies. They join the boards of directors and then profit further from the wars. So it's just a complete ridiculous revolving door of a military-industrial complex system that profits from endless war. So that's what the main motivating factor was this entire time in maintaining our presence in Afghanistan. And this goes for our entire global military presence. The United States spends more than the next 10 countries combined on our military. We have over 800 military bases around the world compared to Russia and China, who have like a couple dozen put between them. So our military presence is just a giant racket, okay? They're just funneling money from the American government, from the American taxpayers, you could say. They're funneling our money into these defense contractors who have the only motivation to continue to pressure the government, to continue the endless wars. So it's a completely perverse and disgusting imperial system that has existed since World War II, when General, Dwight Eisenhower was telling us that the military-industrial complex was going to be a problem. Well, we're seeing it right now. They told us when war becomes extremely profitable, you are going to see more war. And now we are seeing more war because it's extremely profitable. So this is the continued system that we are living under right now, okay? This is not going anywhere just because the Afghan war has ended. They're now shifting resources and priorities to places like Somalia and in Africa and other countries around the Middle East. So this system that we have in place here of profitable war is not going anywhere. This goes for also our mercenary presence that we are maintaining in Afghanistan. We have more mercenaries than boots on the ground troops anywhere in the entire world. So it's just a complete privatized for-profit scheme that is going to be continuing regardless if the Afghanistan war left. This is the system that we have here.